In this video, we're going to wrap up the issues from Chapter 4 in Mealy's Free Will book. In this video, we'll begin by reviewing Wegner's argument against free will. Then we'll turn to the challenges for this argument. Firstly, it looks like Wegner has to explain why we have the experience of free will. Secondly, it looks like his argument might rest on a hasty generalization. Lastly, it looks like there's some experimental data that supports the effectiveness of what are called implementation intentions that would seem to cause some troubles for Wegner's argument. So here's Wegner's automaticity argument that we introduced in a previous video. Some human behavior is not even partly caused by our conscious intentions to perform those actions. That's the purpose of all those experiments regarding sort of automatic actions. All human actions are caused in basically the same way, so no human actions are even partly caused by our conscious intentions to perform those actions. But people only have free will if their behavior is sometimes caused by their conscious intentions to perform the relevant actions. Thus, human beings do not have free will. So the first worry for this argument is just, look, if our conscious thoughts and intentions are never in control of our behavior, then why does it often feel as if they do? It feels like I think to myself, I'm going to raise my arm, and then my conscious thought gets my arm to raise. If my conscious thought is not doing that work, why does it feel like it is? Well, we already discussed it a bit. Wegner's idea is that this experience is an illusion. Our feeling of the sort of authorship of our actions, this feeling that our conscious self is authoring the action, we're thinking about raising our hand and then we raise our hand because of that, is a byproduct of the fact that our unconscious brain processes sometimes causes both our behavior and also causes a conscious thought or intention about that behavior slightly before we actually perform it. So this is the picture that Wegner has about why it feels like our conscious selves are in control. It's because there's this unconscious brain activity that the green arrow here causes. It causes the sort of thought in our mind to pop up, I'm going to raise my hand. And slightly after that, the unconscious brain activity also causes us to raise our hand. Now, because we're not aware of that unconscious brain activity, and we experience the thought, I'm going to raise my hand, and right after that, we see and feel our hand raise, in our experience, so the purple here is supposed to represent how things appear to us, how they feel to us, not how they are in reality necessarily. But it feels to us as if the thought is causing the action, even though it's really just these unconscious processes that are causing both of these things to occur. The second kind of worry is just that Wegner seems to be relying on a hasty generalization. Why should we think that the brain mechanisms that cause our behavior are always the same? Notice there's big differences between sort of unthinking, sort of automatic behaviors, such as sort of tapping my foot to the beat of the music without realizing it, without thinking about it. There's no pros and cons for me to weigh out and sort of to try to reason through to decide what to do. It's just something I do. But that's very different than, say, my leaving my house at 11:30 to make sure I get to my daughter's eye doctor appointment on time. In the one case, I sort of plan things out. I consciously think about where I'm supposed to be, how long it takes to get there. That kind of behavior is very different than just the sort of unthinking tapping of my foot. So why should I think that the way the brain causes one is fundamentally similar to the way the brain causes the other? Now, Wegner doesn't reply this, but one thing he might say is he might appeal to a kind of Occam's razor. So Occam's razor is named after William of Ockham, famous scientist. But the idea here is, other things being equal, a simpler explanation is more likely to be true. And so the idea is, if we already have an explanation for how automatic, unconscious brain processes can produce behavior, then the idea here is we don't need the conscious thought to explain how the behavior is produced. And if we don't need it, it's simpler just to say it's caused by this single sort of mechanism that's common to all the cases. So this leads to a third worry, and this is just that Mealy brings up empirical data that seems to support the hypothesis that at least certain kinds of conscious intentions really do have an effect on our behavior. And if this is true, that would directly contradict Wegner's claim that our conscious intentions never even partly cause our behavior. Mealy brings up data supporting the effectiveness of implementation intentions. So these are intentions to do a thing at a certain place and time or in a certain situation. So the idea is this is not just an intention to do something. This is an intention that includes extra subordinate information about how, where, and when you're going to complete that task. So a regular intention is just, I'm going to study for this test. An implementation intention says, I'm going to study for this test by reviewing my notes and flashcards on Wednesday at 6 p.m. in my dorm room. That includes information not just about what your goal is, but also where, when, and how you're going to complete that goal. All right, so the experimental studies that support the effectiveness of these kinds of intentions that Mealy brings up involve a breast exam study, an exercise study, and a resume study. So let's consider the breast exam study. So there's a group of women that reported that they all had a goal of completing a breast self-examination during the next month. Now, one group was asked by the experimenters to decide where and when they would perform their breast self-examination during the next month. They wrote that information down on a note and turned it in to the experimenters. So notice these women were prompted to perform implementation intentions. And these women were conscious of what they were writing down in the note, and so they were prompted to have conscious implementation intentions. The other group was not prompted to form those implementation intentions. So they have the regular intentions to perform the exam sometime within the next month, but they don't have the implementation intention specifying where, when, and how they were going to do so. Well, what were the results? Well, 100% of the women who were prompted to form the implementation intentions ended up completing their breast self-examination during the next month, and all but one of them completed it pretty much at the time and place that they had intended, that they had written down in their note. Of the other group, only 53% of women who were not prompted to form an implementation intention completed their breast self-examination during the next month. So given the huge difference in numbers, it looks like the formation of that conscious implementation intention had a large effect and influenced these women's behavior. In the exercise study, participants were given a speech about the benefits of exercise, and then they were given the task of doing vigorous exercise for 20 minutes during the next week. One group was asked to decide during the experiment where and when they would complete that task during the next week. So participants in this group were prompted to form the relevant implementation intentions, and the other group was not given that instruction. So they were not prompted to perform the implementation intentions. Well, 91% of the participants who were prompted to form the implementation intentions ended up exercising during the next week. But only 39% of participants who were not prompted to form those implementation intentions exercised during the next week. So yet again, it looks like whether or not someone forms these conscious implementation intentions makes a big difference to what they end up doing. In the final study, it involves participants who were all recovering drug addicts searching for jobs. And all of these participants were given the task of writing a resume by the end of the day. One group was asked in the morning to decide on a place and a time to write their resume later that day, and so they were prompted to form implementation intentions for writing their resume. The second group was asked in the morning to decide on a place and time that they would eat lunch. So they too were prompted to form implementation intentions, but just not for writing their resume, for eating lunch instead. 80% of the subjects prompted to form the implementation intentions about writing their resume ended up doing exactly that before the day was over. So pretty good success rate. But None of the subjects that were prompted to form an implementation intention for eating lunch ended up writing their resume before the end of the day. They all failed to complete that task. Thus, it looks like forming this conscious implementation intention has a large effect on whether the behavior is completed or not, thus illustrating the effectiveness of these kinds of intentions. So let's reconsider Wegner's automaticity argument against free will. Which parts of this reasoning is Mealy trying to challenge? First, he tries to challenge premise 2, this claim that all human actions are caused in basically the same way. Mealy's worried that this is a kind of hasty generalization. We shouldn't generalize from how our actions are caused in cases like the unknowing behavior of tapping my foot to the beat of a music to how all of my behaviors are caused. Because that unknowingly tapping my foot to the beat of the music, that behavior is very different than my sort of getting in my car at a specific time when it's for the purpose of getting to my daughter's eye doctor appointment. In the second case, there's reasons for me to weigh pros and cons. There's things for me to think about. I sort of take into account, I think about the fact that she has an appointment at a certain time. I think about how long it usually takes to drive. I also think about how long it takes to get my daughter to actually get in the car, etc. So why should I think that the way that tapping my foot is caused is representative of how all my actions are caused when a lot of these actions are very different from one another? Secondly, Mealy is challenging premise 3 directly. The implementation intentions, the idea is that these studies suggest that these conscious intentions really do at least partly cause people's behavior. In the breast self-examination study, the implementation intention to get a breast self-examination at a certain place and time seemed to at least partly cause that behavior. Similar remarks apply to the exercise study and the resume study. All right, so that's it for this video, but I want to mention one thing before we go, and that's notice that this information about implementation intentions can be really practically useful to your own life. It suggests that if you want to be successful at completing your goals, you shouldn't just make those goals. You should also try to form implementation intentions. So don't just form the goal of, I'm going to study for that exam, or I'm going to write that paper for that class. You will be more likely to succeed at those tasks, to actually perform them, if you form an implementation intention that includes that subordinate information that says, I'm going to study on Wednesday, right after dinner in my bedroom, by going over my notes and flashcards. If you include that kind of information about the means by which and the time and place that you will complete that task, you are thereby more likely to actually perform that task and complete that goal. So that can be very practically helpful if you keep that in mind when coming up with your goals. Anyways, that's it for now. See you next time. Bye-bye.